The full Edge of Eternity's spoiler is out, so that means I'm going to do part 2 of going over the spoilers, giving some quick thoughts of some of the highlights, and just helping people maybe understand or gather their own thoughts a little bit better. So the first card we have is Beyond the Quiet. For the most part, I think this is probably going to be worse than Ultima. Ultima turns off death triggers similar to Exiling does, and Ultima can clear all artifacts, so I think that it's going to be a little bit more appealing, but specifically if you're up against indestructible permanents, I think this is a solid option. This is something I don't really know the rotation cycle, but maybe Ultima rotates, this stays in. But a solid card, definitely worth considering, and I appreciate how much less powerful it is than Sunfall. Sunfall's a pretty heavy design, and this one's a little bit more chill, so I appreciate it. Next we have Cryogen Relic. When this artifact enters or leaves, draw a card, and then you can pay 2 to sack it to put a stun counter on a tapped creature. I don't know if this is the type of thing that's going to be good in 2025, but it is a card that can just draw 2. You can blink it, you can pick it up, you can sack it. There's all sorts of different ways to use this. Maybe this would be a relevant pauper card, but you can blink it with something like Yorion. You can sack it just to its own ability, get it back with something like Emery. Definitely relevant, and I think worth noting. Next we have, I don't even know, Desculting Blast? I guess it's that simple. 2 mana instant, return target, bounce a non-land, and then if it was an attacking creature, you get a 1/1 that can only block flyers. So I don't know how good this is or isn't, but there's things like Kaito in the format, Enduring Curiosity. The 1/1 seems like it could be relevant. Obviously, we see Into the Flood Maw see a ton of play. I think at 2 mana, this probably isn't worth it, but if you really want the 1/1, maybe you're not in black, for example, and you want to play Enduring Curiosity, could be something that's decent in like mono blue decks or just blue X decks that aren't black. But I think something worth noting. Now we have Devastating Onslaught. So for 3 mana, you get to copy a thing that gets haste and then sack it. For 5 mana, you get 2. For 7 mana, you get 3, and so on and so forth. So there are a few effects in Standard that double your token output. Most notably, the Angel in the set is a 4/5 lifelinker. So if you make 2 copies of it, you're going to end up with 4, and that's 20 power in the air. I don't think this is really a competitive card, but it's kind of interesting. And there is some flashy combo style things you can do with it, so put it on the list. Next we have Faller's Faithful. Kind of an innocuous card, but I think pretty powerful. So 3 mana, 3/1. When it enters, you blow up a creature, and then if that creature wasn't dealt damage this turn, its controller draws 2 cards. So what that means is if you chump attack and they block your guy, you can just play this and finish their creature off. It also means you can just blow up your own thing and draw 2 cards. And it also means before you attack, you can blow up their thing and give them 2 cards. So the amount of flexibility in this card is pretty impressive. The way I would sort of describe it is it's kind of like a Mana War, right? Where a Mana War's a 3 mana 2/2 that bounces a creature. Instead of bouncing the creature, you're dealing with it, and your opponent's getting 2 cards. But in a tempo-oriented game, it's probably not going to matter. Like, imagine some game states where your opponent has a Shieldred, and you just have this sort of enabler in your deck that can just deal with the Shieldred. Like, yes, your opponent's going to end up on cards, but they're going to lose tempo, they're going to lose board presence. Maybe you can just attack them down from whatever their life total is. So this card looks really appealing to me. I could be wrong, but it has a ton of flexibility, and it seems like a useful card. So I could see this maybe in Sephiroth decks. I don't know if you're going to have room for it, but if there are things like Kalidas in the format, things like Shieldred, just whatever blockers that you want to remove, this card seems very appealing. Next we have Hardlight Containment, an aura for a white mana, enchant an artifact, and then it exiles a non-land permanent, and the card you enchant gets Ward 1. So kind of like a Chain of the Rocks, a little bit different. You are susceptible to things like a Braid blowing up your artifact. There are some things in Standard that have indestructible. Obviously in Pioneer, you can combine this with Darksteel Citadel. Interesting card. I'm not sure how good this is going to be. There's a sort of portable hold reprint we'll get to later, but It seems like a card you could have success with. But as time, like, this is the type of thing where if this card started seeing play, the meta would adapt, and you would just be getting punished a lot by just having your opponent blow up the artifact that you enchant. So next is Honor. Not going to spend too much time talking about this, but this is a good Valiant enabler. Maybe you're playing a 1/1 counter deck. You can use this to buff your VV, I guess. It's in white, so it's probably not worth, but a simple card. Pretty solid value, kind of like a Gird for battle. Now we have Hymn of the Faller. So this one's interesting. 2 mana, surveil 1, draw a card, lose a life. But if you trigger Void, so if you or if you warp a spell or a non-land permanent left the battlefield, you get to draw another card. So if I cast something like a Stab and I kill your creature, then I'm going to get a Sign in Blood that surveils 1, and it loses 1 instead of losing 2. I don't know if this card is actually that good, but it's kind of interesting. There's not really anything occupying this space, and it's a decent 2-drop. Realistically, maybe I shouldn't have added this to the list, but it's an interesting card and definitely worth considering. Some more mid-rangey, maybe like if you have like a blue-black deck that cares about spells, a card like this could be appealing. Now we have Ice Till Explorer. 4 mana, 2/4. You get to play lands from your graveyard. You get to play an extra land a turn, and then your landfall mills you. So for 4 mana, this doesn't necessarily seem like a competitive card. It's probably great in like more casual formats like Commander, but it does a lot of important things. So it enables itself. So typically cards that enable themselves are just better than other things, obviously. You don't have to be doing too much milling for this to get extra lands from your graveyard. And it does, like, there's a landfall deck in Standard that's already very good. So I don't think it's out of the question that this card would be playable. I kind of wish it had Reach or something. It was just a little bit better of a defensive tool because it is 4 mana. And a lot of times you're going to play your free land, and then maybe it'll end up dying. But I guess in the context of, I don't know, this one's tough for me to analyze because it kind of just seems like a do-nothing that's just going to die. But it's got the stat line, it's got the text box, it has a lot going on for it. It's just expensive, so I would not be surprised if this card ends up being important, but I also wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't really have a home. Now we have Invasive Maneuvers. 2 mana, instant, deal 3. It deals 5 instead if you control a spacecraft. So there are a few spacecrafts I have on this list. I think there's only 2. For the most part, I think the spacecrafts are relatively weak. Probably not going to see a ton of play in Constructed. But I wanted to pull this one out just because 2 mana, instant speed, deal 5 is a pretty powerful card. It's sort of close to like a go for the throat. Now we have Lightstotall Inquisitor. This card's really sweet. So it's a 1-drop angel, which is relevant. Maybe you want to trigger your Bishop of Wings. But its text box is also pretty solid. So you get a 1 mana, 2/1 Vigilance, which is sort of above rate for a 1-drop on its own. I don't think that we've ever had a 1 mana, 2/1 Vigilance in Magic. At least in like standard sets. But when it enters, each opponent exiles a card from their hand. They may play that card as long as it remains exiled. Each spell cast this way costs 1 more to cast. Each land played this way enters tapped. So it sort of just nerfs 1 card in their hand, which might not seem like a lot, but I'm not going to say that it's free text, but like just a 1 mana 2/1 Vigilance that does like anything. Like even the most simple minor thing I think is going to be pretty relevant. And this is the type of text box where like, yes, your opponent's going to exile their worst card. But if they're spending their mana to keep up with your sort of aggressive push, at some point they're probably going to need to use that card. And then this thing's going to get value. And there's some other cute things. Maybe in a format like Pioneer, you can combine this with Wasteland Strangler, where they exile their card and then you just eat it. They never get to play it. It also pairs well with Aven Interceptor, I think is the name of it, that makes your opponent's cards they cast from exile cost 2 more. So just a solid 1-drop. And yeah, I do think it's relevant that it's an angel. I don't know if this is actually going to end up in the angel decks, but I think it's something to think about. Now we have the first spacecraft on our list. We have Lumen class frigate, probably frigate. I don't know. So 2 mana spacecraft station at 2 counters. Other creatures you control get +1/+1, and then at 12 plus counters, flying, lifelink 3/5. So there's a curve in standard. If we go back to our Lightstotall Inquisitor, you can play this on turn 1 or any 2-power 1-drop. And then this goes up to 2 counters the turn you play it because you tap your 2/1. And with Vigilance, you get to attack even, which is nice. And then on turn 3, you can play Toby. I don't know its full name, but it's a 3-drop that is a 1/1, and it comes with a 4/4. So that means that your 1-drop is going to turn on the +1/+1s. And so after you have the first class or level or whatever you want to call it of this, now your 1-drop is a 3-power, your Toby is 2-power, and then the 4/4 it made is 5-power. So that's going to be 7 and 3, which is going to be 10, of course. So you get this up to 12 on curve if you have a 1-drop into Toby. So I think that's something worth noting. These spacecrafts that you have sort of like a nut draw with, where they have a big number, it's kind of intimidating, but you can still turn them on relatively quickly. I think they're worth considering, at least trying in Constructed. And this one, also, the fact that it buffs your creatures makes that scary 12 number a little bit less scary, because it's realistically it's kind of like a 9 or a 10, because the creatures that you play are just going to be bigger. So it's going to be easier to turn on. And then you get a 3/5 lifelink, which is not, like, that's no joke. That's definitely a relevant stat line. So I think this card could see play, but at the end of the day, it might just get blown up by a Braid and you end up tapping your whole board. So like I said, the station spacecraft mechanic has some flaws. Now we have Meltstrider's Resolve. This card's surprisingly powerful. So for 1 mana, you get an Aura. So that's going to trigger all your Eerie cards. You can get it with something like Light Paws and Pioneer. But when it enters, enchanted creature fights up to 1 other creature an opponent controls. And then it gets 2 toughness permanently. And it also gets can't be blocked by more than 1 creature permanently. So just a card that gives 2 toughness and then is a fight spell for 1 mana, I think is something that would be worth considering. But when you combine that extra line of text at the bottom, the fact that it triggers Eerie, it's an Aura, it does all these other weird minor things, this card actually looks pretty strong to me. And I think there's a reason that it looks strong. I think they've tried to make these green removal spells more appealing or worth playing, because typically they're just so bad against black removal spells and against things like Death Touch. So yeah, I don't know. This card looks very good, but also I wouldn't be surprised if it just ended up falling short like all the other fight spells. Definitely worth noting, definitely worth talking about, and I think worth considering moving forward. Just a ton of value for 1 mana. If you get to successfully use this card, it's pretty powerful. Okay, next we have Memorial Vault. 4 mana artifact. Tap, sacrifice another artifact, exile the top X cards of your library, where X is 1 plus the mana value of the sacrificed artifact. You may play those cards this turn. So if you sack a 2-drop, you get to exile 3 cards, and you can play them this turn. So we're going to talk about Simulacrum Synthesizer and Repurposing Bay a lot. This sort of fits in that same space. I don't really have too much to say about this card. I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up falling short just because of the nature of Magic in the current year. You really just need to play to the board in a ton of context. But this is capable of just getting a ton of free cards. We talked about that card that drew a card when it came into play and when it left the battlefield. So if you are playing a grindy matchup where your opponent's not just like killing you or comboing you, and like card advantage matters, this thing's obscene, right? Like its ability, you can just play artifacts that do a thing when they trigger, and then just use it to get, I don't know, you could draw like 5 cards a turn basically, if you're playing all the cards you get from this. So this looks powerful, and again, it is sort of 4 mana, it doesn't affect the board. Time will tell, but this is something I think it's worth looking out for. Now we have Mental Modulation. 2 mana instant. Tap artifact or creature, draw a card, but it costs 1 less to cast if it's during your turn. So everyone is familiar with Storm Chaser's talent at this point. Any sort of aggressive prowess deck, you can use this to tap down a blocker, draw a card, trigger all your prowess. course, you can use it with something like Vivi, Slickshot Show Off. And you can also just use it as a defensive tool, right? Like if your opponent has a Slickshot Show Off and they play a bunch of spells to make it big, you can tap it before they hit you. Just seems like an appealing card. Definitely worth considering. Any 1-mana cantrip, basically in any standard format, is going to be worth taking a look at. Obviously, we have Sleight of Hand and Opt, so maybe this doesn't make the cut until later, and you need a target to be able to cantrip. You can't just play it on an open board. But it does hit artifacts and creatures, so there's an extra permanent type that lets you cycle this. Now we have Pinnacle Emissary. So I know I mentioned Simulacrum Synthesizer earlier. This one goes with that. We've got a 3-mana 3/3. Whenever you cast an artifact, you get a 1/1 flyer that can only block flyers. And it has warp for 1 mana. So if you have 2 Simulacrum Synthesizers, you can warp this, trigger both of them. Next turn, you can play it again, trigger both of them again. And then it just does stuff, right? Like your artifact deck that is full of artifacts to trigger your Synthesizer and sacrifice to your Repurposing Bay. It has a good text box. This card looks very, very powerful. I do want to make the point again how strong Ultima can be against these artifact decks. It just blows up everything. There's a few more cards in the format that just deal with artifacts. But if you're prepared for Ultima, maybe you have some Spell Pierces, things like that, I could see these artifact decks ended up being really powerful. And yeah, I should again make the note that you can play this for 1 mana and then use Repurposing Bay to sacrifice it to tutor up a 4-drop if that ever matters. So looks strong, definitely worth considering in your Synthesizer decks going forward. And maybe it's a reasonable card to just play as like a Sai. As just a solid value card. Now we have Pinnacle Star Cage. A lot like Temporary Lockdown. I will try to go over the differences. So for 3 mana, artifact, that's relevant. When it enters, exile all artifacts and creatures, so not enchantments, and planeswalkers, I suppose, with mana value 2 or less until it leaves the battlefield. It's got this 8 mana text. This is, I guess I'll read it, but it's not that relevant. Put each card exiled with this artifact into its owner's graveyard, then create a 2/2 for each card, and then sacrifice this artifact. So once you get to the end of the game, you can use it as a win condition. It's probably almost never going to come up, and it's probably the case that you've already won if you are in the position to activate this. But let's go back to the important parts of the card. First off, this dies to Abrade. Temporary Lockdown was a very appealing card against the mono-red deck last format. Obviously, cards got banned, but if the mono-red deck could just Abrade Temporary Lockdown, it would really change the dynamic with those decks. So that's super important, and that is, I think, a huge reason why this card is sort of nerfed. Next up, it doesn't hit enchantments. So Skrell's Hive is rotating, but if they decide to print a card like Skrell's Hive, it means that if you're on the play, maybe you can sneak down an enchantment against a control deck and use it to sort of carry you through the game and have some resiliency against your opponent's sweepers. So I like that as well. And then finally, this triggers Synthesizer. It can get tutored with Repurposing Bay. It being an artifact matters for a multitude of reasons. But I like this design. I think this card will probably be relevant going forward, but I think it's a little bit healthier than Temporary Lockdown, so I appreciate that. Now we have Requiem Monolith. This card is weird. 3 mana artifact. Until end of turn, target creature gains. When this creature is dealt damage, you draw that many cards and lose that much life. That creature's controller may have this artifact deal 1 damage to it, activated as a sorcery. So you pick a thing, and then that thing, whenever that thing gets pinged or blocked or whatever, you draw that many cards and lose that much life. So if I activate this, I target my Screaming Nemesis. I say, yes, I want to deal 1 to it. Now you have the Screaming Nemesis emblem on you. You can't gain any life, and I draw 1 card. If I have whatever creature in play, and I activate this, and I say, sure, I'll deal 1, and I'll draw a card. And then I play something like an Ill-Timed Explosion. I discard a 7-drop. Now I get to draw 7 cards and lose 7 life. But also, you can just use this before combat and maybe say, hey, like, Your creature can block my things, but when it does, I'm going to draw a bunch of cards. So I don't know. This card's interesting. Like, you can use it to ping off your own Bloodghasts to trigger your like Sephiroth or your Blood Artist style things, and then get them back and just do dice trigger stuff. There's a lot of ways you can use this card. Fairy Mastermind is leaving the format, so these card advantage cards are a little bit less punishing, or a little bit less easily punished. All that being said, maybe this card just doesn't end up making the cut. It is sort of just 3 mana do nothing, and you're gonna be comparing this to like Unholy Annex. Red Black's mana base is not very good going forward, so I don't know about this one. It triggers Synthesizer again, but very cool design. Happy it exists. Wouldn't be surprised either way. Now we have Seam Rip. So this is Portable Hole. This is an enchantment version of Portable Hole that's relevant for Eerie. That's also relevant for the Temporary Lockdown. If you played Portable Hole and then you play Temporary Lockdown in a format like Pioneer, the Lockdown's going to mess it up. In Standard, you don't have to run into that problem anymore. It also matters for Indomitable Creativity, because if you have Creativity and Portable Hole in your deck, whenever you start flipping cards, you can flip the Portable Hole, because Creativity hits creatures and artifacts. This one, you don't have to worry about that. But last format, we saw Corey Steelcutter up the Beanstalk, Hopeless Nightmare even. This effect isn't great against those things, but it would have been nice to have the option to have this. I feel like this was printed a little bit too late, I guess, but whatever. It's fine. I'm happy it exists. I think it's a useful card. I think it's a powerful card. I think it will be relevant even in the formats with Portable Hole, like I said. Triggers Eerie. Very good. So, nice option. Happy it exists. I think this is a healthy type of card to have in a format like Standard or Pioneer. I don't think it's too powerful. It never trades up on mana more than one, and it's really useful. So happy this was printed. Now we have Synthesizer Lab Ship. 1 mana, station, spacecraft, whatever. At the beginning of combat on your turn, up to one other target artifact you control becomes an artifact creature with base power and toughness 2/2, and gains flying until the end of the turn. So this is not permanent. And it doesn't actually work with other station things. Like you have to fulfill the counter requirement. You can't just cheat to have like a flying. Like if this became a 2/2, it wouldn't have flying and vigilance unless it had 9+ counters, for example. But it's kind of a relevant text box. It's so cheap. You could play it alongside something like Enduring Curiosity, and now you have these flyers all the time that can peck at your opponent. And also, it's just 1 mana for something that can eventually potentially become a 4/4 flying vigilance. So a 1 mana Sarah Angel is no joke. It's a 1 mana artifact. It's worth considering in a few different spots. Kind of a weird design, but anytime you see a 1 mana card that has relevant text, you should consider putting it in different places. Definitely always worth trying the 1 mana cards if they look appealing at all. And I think this one does. So I don't know exactly where it's going to go, if like it's playable in like in Soul Artifacts in Pioneer, or if there will be an artifact deck in Standard that wants this, but look forward to giving it a shot at least. Now we have Sire, Vandom, Sunstar, Exemplar. So white-black 2/2 Vigilance Menace, solid start. Whenever another creature you control dies or is put into exile, put a 1/1 counter on it, and you gain 1 life. Whenever it dies, put it into exile, dies or is put into exile. While its power is 4 or greater, you get to blow up a non-land permanent. So this card's text box seems incredibly good. It just does it has keywords. It grows for relatively easy cost. There's sacrifice decks that can use it. You can use the warp mechanic. You can blink your own things. You can use equipment to get it to 4 power. You don't even have to do that. It's a human, so maybe there's human synergies. So yeah, this card just seems good to me. Like I said, it's if you want this thing to have 4 power, it will have 4 power. And the fact that it triggers when it gets exiled as well as when it dies is really nice. So it's going to dodge. It's not going to trigger against Ultima, because Ultima's going to end the turn. But maybe your opponent has the Portable Hole, but you've already gotten it to 4 power, and now you can just blow up one of the things. Or I suppose you could even blow up the Portable Hole and get this back. But yeah, this card seems good. I'm not 100% sure if it's going to have a home. I don't know if it's a card you need or want in like the Raise the Past decks, but I think that's the most obvious spot for it. And if you like playing the Sephiroth Raise the Past style deck, probably craft 1 or 2 of these, start giving it a few spins, and then figure it out that way. But this card seems solid to me. It does seem very good. And finally, we have Tanic Steadfast Second. So this card is flashy. I don't know how good it is, but you get a 4-mana 3/5, so that stat line is already pretty solid. It's not incredible, but it doesn't have to do too much extra because it's got a sturdy stat line. Other creatures you control have haste. Well, that's already something that's obviously relevant. And then artifact cards and red creature cards in your hand have warp 3. So what does that actually mean? I don't fully know. The most obvious thing to me is the red overlord, where you could play this, untap, warp in the red overlord, it deals 4, it has haste, it attacks, deals 4 again. So you can just sort of blow up your opponent's board, kill 2 of their things, attack them for like 8 or whatever the damage is. And you can also go face with both triggers. If your opponent has no board, they take, what is it? It's like 16, something like that. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some ways to use this, but the biggest thing I want to note is how solid the stat line is. It's probably not worth playing a 4-mana 3/5 that doesn't have an ETB, but it is big enough to block most things in combat. It can hit for some points of damage. Just the static of everything having haste all the time is nice, and then you have this extra bonus. So maybe you're using it to put in dinosaurs or overlords or whatever it is. Maybe there's some big artifacts that you want to use it with, but it's a flashy card. It's cool. I think it's worth considering. But let me know what you guys think. Let me know if there's any cards I missed that you think should have been on my list. This set's really cool. I don't know if it's the most powerful set in Standard, but there's a lot of interesting cards. It feels, coming off the back of the bans, going into this set, it feels like, I kind of like that the power level of everything doesn't seem too high. It doesn't seem like we're constantly just getting more Duskmourns or more Bloomburrows. So I appreciate that. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Enjoy your Edge of Eternity, wherever you go for pre-releases, or if it's just online. I'm optimistic for future Standard, so we will see. There's some blue-black cards that are pretty good. There's some VV Cauldron nonsense that's pretty strong, but hopefully people can figure out some ways to beat it. So, peace.